Hi everyone and welcome to today's Champion Bets webinar, NFL season preview. Thank you for tuning in and thank you to those checking in on our website and YouTube. With me today is our NFL analyst, Scott Kellen. Scott, welcome.
Hey, thank you very much, Daniel. Glad to be here.
No worries, mate. And as in all of our previous webinars, today is fully interactive, so please feel free to fire in any questions and we will endeavour to answer them as we move through. Scott, I've finally picked an NFL team. It's the Cleveland Browns. I know they've struggled the last 2 years, 1-31. They've brought in Baker Mayfield, Denzel Ward, Tyrod Taylor, Jarvis Landry, who's a Pro Bowler. How do you think they're going to go this year?
Well, here's the first thing I can probably almost guarantee: your newfound team is going to win more games than they did last year, so that's always a good thing. I think they're going to actually be a pretty interesting team this year. You know, as you said, 0-16 last year, 1-15 the year before. They've been just a disaster. But they finally have a GM in there that's actually a true GM, John Dorsey, who had a lot of success at Kansas City. When he came into Kansas City after they had a horrible year, he brought in a quarterback that was very good at managing the game, didn't turn the ball over, Alex Smith. He turned that around very quickly there. And he's done the same thing here. So yes, he drafted Baker Mayfield, but he brought in Tyrod Taylor. Tyrod Taylor just does not turn the ball over. He's not going to, which also means he doesn't take a lot of chances, but he's not going to turn the ball over. And that's going to be huge for Cleveland because last year Cleveland was pretty even from the line of scrimmage, but they were minus 28 in turnovers. And I think Deshaun Kaiser, their main quarterback, had 21, 22 turnovers, interceptions last year. So that led to a lot of their games that they lost. He's not going to turn the ball over, which should keep them in the game. And as you mentioned, they've added a lot of decent players to the team this year. The real question is they had 0 wins last year. Their over-under number is 6. You know, can they get to 6-7 wins? That's the real question. But I think they're actually going to be a pretty decent team this year and going to surprise some people and could be a decent point spread look from time to time this year as well.
I will be wearing my Cleveland Browns hat with pride after hearing that. Thank you, man. Oh, mate, I will throw over to you.
All right, very good. Thank you very much. And hey, I'm jealous. I wish I was in Australia. Can't wait to get there someday. But thank you all for jumping on today, and for those of you who view this down the road here as well. What I thought we would take a look at here is it's preseason yet, and season over/under wins for the different teams. And I thought we'd go through and kind of do an exercise that I do every single year. It kind of helps to paint the picture of where these teams sit, both from last year, how they ended, did they overachieve, underachieve, and what should we expect from them this year. It won't necessarily give us any direct results from a point spread standpoint, but much like the Cleveland Browns, it'll give us some indicators that we can pay attention to as far as teams that might be a little overvalued or undervalued as we go through the year. And we're going to look at this by division, and hopefully everyone can see that. I'm going to look at this a couple different ways. The first way we're going to look at this is something called the Pythagorean Theorem. It was something that was devised by Bill James years ago, and he really applied it to baseball. And another gentleman took it and really kind of applied it to the football season. And what it does is takes a team's points scored and points allowed and the difference between those and assign wins based on that point spread, that margin of points scored and points allowed, and then compares it to their actual over/under wins from the previous season. And it helps to identify teams that have overachieved, but also teams that have underachieved. And just to kind of give you an idea of how really well this does, teams that are 8-8 but exceeded their points allowed, meaning they scored more points than they allowed, and sometimes maybe many more points, they actually generally increase in wins the following year. And teams that were just the opposite of that, might have been 8-8, but they may have even scored fewer points than they allowed, they usually regress the following year. And so by looking at this, it's a very good indicator, and it becomes very easy, quite frankly, to tell which teams are going to win more games or lose more games than they lost the previous year. The real challenge here becomes, like the Cleveland Browns, for example, we're going to see when we get to Cleveland, there's clear evidence they're going to win a lot more than 0 games this year. The real question is, can they exceed 6 wins, which is where their over-under number is set, and we'll look at that. So, and then along with the Pythagorean theorem, we can kind of get a basis for where we should be looking for these teams. The next thing that I like to do every preseason is Cantor Fitzgerald out here in Las Vegas. They set a line in every NFL game before. I think they set it usually back in April or May, with the exception of Week 17, because Week 17 is a bit of a crapshoot. But by looking at those lines, we can assign a probability of winning for each of those games and get a pretty good indicator of what a team's season win total expectation is going to be versus what the line makers actually set for them. So I thought we'd go through that division by division. We'll try to point out overachievers, underachievers. I'll try to point out a couple spots where I'm going to be playing season over/under wins. I can tell you right now, for the most part, they're going to be unders versus the overs, and hopefully it'll serve as a good guide as you all get ready for the season coming up here. So, if we look at the NFC West, and if hopefully everyone can see this pretty clearly, I've tried to indicate in red or green. Red means the team's overachieved, and green, when we see a green, will mean that the team has underachieved. The other thing that we'll look at here is how have these teams done in close games, meaning games decided by 7 or fewer points. And usually teams that exceed that and do very well in close games, they regress to the mean, and just the opposite as well. And again, it serves as a pretty good indicator that we might be able to find some value for the upcoming season. So when we look at this for the NFC West, we see Arizona is 8-8, was 8-8 last year, but based on their Pythagorean theorem, they should have really only won 6.1 games, meaning they actually overachieved by about 1.9 wins. And we can see in close games, they were very fortunate, and this will be a common theme for teams that overachieved. They're typically going to be very good in close games, or very fortunate, however you want to look at that. They were 6-2 last year in games decided by 7 or fewer points. Now, just one other point to make here, and Arizona doesn't quite apply to it, but they're so close, I think it's worth mentioning. Typically, teams that exceed their previous year win total by 2 to 3 wins, meaning Arizona won 8 games last year. I'm gonna round down here and say they should have only won 6, so they essentially exceeded their win total by 2 wins. Typically, those teams, they regress by about 2.5 wins the following year. So if Arizona does regress, they go from 8 wins down to 2.5 wins less. That puts them at about 5.5. Their season win total is roughly 5.85. Let me just check. Those numbers you see on the screen are probably a week or two old. Just checking. Their season win total right now, I believe, probably sits closer to about 6.1. So we can see Arizona overachieve. They're probably not going to win 8 games this year. And as I said earlier, it's pretty easy to determine that they're going to lose more games. Again, the real question is, from a season over/under win total, is can they go over or under that season win total? When we look at a team like the Rams, they were 11-5 last year, and when we look at their Pythagorean theorem, they should have won about 11.3 games, so they were right there. They were 4-2 in close games. But a couple things here is, if we look in the lower left-hand corner, we can see the Rams' projected win by the line maker is 9.9. Let's call it 10 wins. And if we look over in the right-hand column, projected wins based on predicted lines, we can see that they're only supposed to win 9.16 games, which means there is actually some value on the Rams going under the total. Now, the Rams have loaded up this year. They've added a lot of good pieces to their team. They've got rid of some average to below average players. And every indication is this team should be very, very good this year. But the Rams were also the healthiest team last year in the league, and that stuff usually does not repeat itself. So it also probably means they've got some injuries coming that maybe they didn't see last year. And besides being 4-2 in close games, maybe they were a little bit lucky last year from a health standpoint as well. And then when we look at Arizona, we can see the schedule rank there is number 1, meaning they have the toughest schedule in the league this year. And as we go through some of these teams, there's a lot of information on these pages. We're not going to go through all the information. The couple things I would point out here, we're looking at the Arizona Cardinals page. In the gray box there in the upper left-hand corner, you see the number 9. That means that Arizona plays 9 teams that are projected to win 8 or more games this year. So they have a fairly tough schedule. And the teams that you see colored in red there, those are the teams that are projected to win 9 or more games this year. So Arizona, pretty tough schedule. They overachieved last year. They were very good in close games. A regression for them is certainly expected, and I don't think that surprises anyone. When we look at the Rams, they have 8 games against teams projected to finish 500 or above. They've also got 2 sets of 3-game road trips in their schedule there, where they go to Seattle, Denver, and San Francisco. Those are not going to be easy games. And then they go to Kansas City, Detroit, and Chicago. They do get a bye in there as well, so that'll break up that road trip a little bit. But their game against Kansas City is in Mexico City, so they are giving up a home game as well to play that game in Kansas City. So just a few things that are a little bit disadvantaged from a disadvantage standpoint for the Rams in trying to get over that 10 win number that they're going to have. And they play some pretty tough teams this year: Green Bay, Minnesota, and then the Chargers out of the NFC West. So it's a pretty tough schedule for the Rams. I would only look under. I'm not necessarily going to play them under, but I would only look under if I was playing a Rams season over under win total. And if we look at San Francisco, now here's a team that actually has a very easy schedule. They only play 6 teams that are projected to win 8 or more games. So they have a pretty easy schedule. They picked up some nice players this year in Jerick McKinnon at running back. He's a little banged up right now. And they replaced their center with the Giants' old center. And they picked up Richard Sherman. We'll see what Richard Sherman has left. But they also have a pretty big suspension to start out the year. Reuben Foster, one of their best linebackers, is suspended for the first 2 games as well. But they do actually have a pretty easy schedule. I'm going to go back to the original page here, and we look at the 49ers. Projected win total is 8.2. I've got them at 8.45. There is actually a little bit of slight value to the over on the season win total for the 49ers. And we know Jimmy Garoppolo came in there last year, played the last 5 games, went 5-0. I think he was 2-0 or something like that with the Patriots. So the kid has never lost a game. I have a feeling he'll lose his first game this year, of course. But that team looked night and day different once he got at the quarterback position for them last year. And all of a sudden, this team had life in their offense. And they've got a great head coach in Kyle Shanahan who can really coach this kid up. And let's remember, Garoppolo learned from the best in Tom Brady and Bill Belichick at New England. So this kid is seasoned, knows what he's doing, and he's got another great mentor for a head coach right now in San Francisco as well. So it'll be very interesting to see what the 49ers do this year. But, you know, if you can find a season win total at 8, taking a shot on the over here may not be a bad shot for them because, again, as we can see here, they've got a very easy schedule. And then just the last team we'll look at here, Seattle. You can see Seattle's schedule is brutal. They play 10 teams that are scheduled to win 8 or more games this year, including 8 of their last 9 games. And Seattle, just in general, has kind of fallen apart here. They've kind of seen their run here, which got them to 2 Super Bowls, and they won 1. That has pretty much been wrapped up. And they've lost quite a few players, whether they've left or to injury or free agency. And they look to be on the downside of what we've seen with them in the past few years as well. All right, so let's move on then to the NFC South, and we'll get our first over/under play in terms of what I perceive to be some value here this year. We've got a couple colors here. We can see Carolina was 11-5 last year, but based on their Pythagorean Theorem, they should have really only won 9 games. They overachieved by 2 wins last year. And again, if you remember that stat I pointed out earlier, teams that exceed their win total by 2 to 3 wins the previous year typically decrease by about 2.5 wins on average the following year. That would take them from 11 wins down to about 8.5 wins. That just happens to be roughly where their season win total is at. They were also 7-2 in close games last year, so they were extremely lucky, fortunate, good, however you want to define that, in close games, and that probably has a slight regression coming for them as well. Couple that, Carolina has probably been the most predictable team over the last few years in terms of overachieving, followed by an underachieving, followed by overachieving. They've just been very predictable in that pattern with Ron Rivera as their head coach, and they fit that pattern this year to really probably underachieve after overachieving last year. And we can see they've got the 21st toughest schedule. So again, their season win total is at about 8.5. I've got them projected at 8.12. So there's some value to the under. We know they were very good in close games last year. That helps us. We know they overachieved by 2 wins. On top of that, they've got some injuries here. They've lost some players. Thomas Davis, their linebacker, is suspended for the first 4 games. They lost one of their cornerbacks, Daryl Worley. They went out and picked up Ross Cockrell, but he is now injured and out for the year. And also they're on their offensive line. They are banged up on the offensive line. And they also lost their best offensive lineman last year, Andrew Norwell, who is now gone. So they've got a questionable offensive line. They've got some injuries. And again, they overachieved and were lucky in close games. I see some good value here. And this is one, as long as you can get 8.5 on the season wins, I would strongly recommend playing under the season win total here. This is probably my best bet of all over/under season win totals on Carolina here. And then the other team to take note that played much different than their record last year is Tampa Bay. They were 5-11, but they actually should have won about 6.8 games, so they underachieved. And they were also very poor in close games, going 3-7. But we can see their over/under projected win total is 6.3 set by the line maker, and based on the number I get, they're at about 6.17. So there's not a lot of value, I don't think, in the Tampa Bay play. They do have the 5th toughest schedule, though, so they are going to play a very tough schedule. Jameis Winston suspended for the first 3 games, although Ryan Fitzpatrick is not a big drop-off, really, quite frankly. Winston's got more upside potential, but Fitzpatrick is a very serviceable quarterback. I don't think they lose a ton, really, by losing him, although the lines certainly have changed a little bit because of that. And then the other 2 teams here, which appear to be a little bit overvalued, we can see New Orleans. The win total is 9.8 for New Orleans. And but I've got them only winning about 9.1 games, so there might be some value on New Orleans a little bit going under. In Atlanta, same thing, projected win total 9.4 set by the line maker, and I've got them, call it 8.99 wins, so maybe a little bit of value going under as well. And as we look at the schedule here, we can see Atlanta plays 9 games against teams that are projected to win 8 or more games, so they've got a pretty tough schedule, including the first 3 games for the first 5, and then we can see they finish the season with a very strong and tough schedule as well. So it will not be an easy schedule for Atlanta. And I will point out, we mentioned earlier the Rams were the healthiest team last year. Atlanta was the 2nd healthiest team last year. So it stands to reason that they will not have that same luck this year. Carolina, by the way, we just mentioned the 7th healthiest team last year. Again, I would not expect them to have the same type of luck from a health standpoint. Carolina has 8 games against tough opponents this year, scheduled or projected to finish 500 or above. They start out with a couple tough games and then finish the season with 3 tough games, 2 against New Orleans, one against Atlanta. We look at New Orleans, they have a very, very tough schedule. 10 games against teams projected to win 8 or more games. And if we look here, it's what, 3, 6, 9, 9 of their last 11 games are against very, very tough competition. So they do not have an easy schedule, including playing 3 games in the road near the end of the year at Dallas, at Tampa Bay, and at Carolina. And the last team here, Tampa Bay, has just an unbelievably, this is probably the toughest schedule in terms of teams that they're going to play that are projected to finish 500 or above. They face 11 teams that are projected to finish 500 or above. The first 3, which will be without Winston, of course, and then the last, looks like last 6 games, they will also finish a very, very, very tough schedule as well. They do get 3 home games in a row there, which might help them a little bit, but they have got an extremely tough schedule. Now, Tampa Bay, you know, is as much of a clown show that team tends to be year to year. They have actually added some decent pieces to their team this year. Their offense was okay last year. Their defense was miserable, and they've actually added. They picked up some players through free agency, and then looking here, it looks like 3 of their top 4 draft picks were also defensive players, a couple cornerbacks, and their top draft pick, a defensive tackle. So you know, whether those draft picks actually do something, that remains to be seen. But at least in terms of drafting the right guys to really help this team improve, they've gone about that the right way, and now it's just a matter of those players really fulfilling the status that they got when they drafted them. So their defense could see some improvement this year. And again, going back to the Carolina underpick, New Orleans and Atlanta, to me, are the class of this division, which means that if we're going under 8.5 wins for Carolina, it's hard to believe that 3 teams are going to win 9 games in that division. And so I feel pretty good about this Carolina pick. And as I said earlier, this would probably be my best over-under pick, going under 8.5 wins on the Carolina Panthers. All right, let's move along. We are going to the NFC North now. Looking at the NFC North, we can see a couple teams that overachieved and underachieved as well. Minnesota being the first team here, of course. The Vikings winning 13 games last year, overachieved by about 1.3 wins. They should have won about 11.7. They were 4-2 in close games, so very fortunate in close games. It's not a huge record in close games, but they certainly were above 500. And then you can see the opposite there. The Bears went 5-11, but actually should have won about 6.2 games. Actually underachieved by about 1.2 wins, and were 2-5 in close games last year. So let's take a look at both these teams. The Vikings, obviously the big move there is Case Keenum's gone. He's now in Denver. And to replace him, they signed Kirk Cousins to a guaranteed contract, 100% fully guaranteed. Don't think that's ever happened before. And it was a massive contract. But Cousins is pretty interesting. He's got more upside potential than Case Keenum. But when we look at this team compared to last year and then compared to this year, Case Keenum played lights out last year and actually rated a little bit better than Kirk Cousins last year. The season they got from Case Keenum last year is probably what they're going to get from Kirk Cousins this year and years going forward. So their offense may not actually improve that much going forward, simply because Case Keenum played lights out last year and played the year of his life. So we've maybe seen to some degree how good their offense can be. Defensively, I think they only lost about 3 games to their defensive starters last year with injuries. They were unbelievably healthy last year on defense, and that is just something that's probably not going to repeat itself again this year. Mike Zimmer, phenomenal coach, great defensive coach. They've got a great defense. There's no questions about that. And this team will be very, very tough to beat again this year. You can see their projected wins are 10.1. I've got them at 9.87 wins based on the lines that have been handed them for the season. So really no value going either way there. The same with Green Bay, basically no value. There's really no value at all on any of these teams from a season under win projection standpoint. But let's talk about the Bears too. The Bears are kind of like the Cleveland Browns in a sense that they weren't very good last year. John Fox coached there for a few years, defensive-minded coach, very conservative coach, always kept his team in the game. I kind of liked him there because he was very good as a home dog in Chicago, and he also gave us a lot of good unders just because they played that conservative style. But that offense was brutal last year. They suffered some injuries at receiver position. They had guys like myself playing receiver. They were just bad. But this team is going to be completely different on offense this year. And if any of you guys watch the preseason, just take a look. And obviously, by the way, the third week coming up here for preseason is where starters typically will play at least a half and into the third quarter for some teams. Aaron Rodgers, I don't think is playing at all this week, but you get a good look at teams and how they may appear to be going forward for the season by watching this week. And what Chicago has is they brought in Matt Nagy, who was a disciple of Andy Reid at Kansas City. He's an offensive-minded coach. He's going to run a lot of these run-pass options, which Mitchell Trubisky, their quarterback. Trubisky, a rookie last year, came out of North Carolina, played in kind of a similar offense, spread offense. I think he only played for 1 year, so he doesn't have a ton of experience. The jury, quite frankly, is still out on him a little bit. But the thing with Matt Nagy is he's going to put him in a position to succeed. He's going to create a system for him that's very quarterback friendly. They've added a lot of players around him from a receiver and tight end standpoint through free agency and through the draft. So this offense is going to look a lot different this year. And it's actually probably going to be pretty exciting to watch. The real question will just be how good can Trubisky be? If he turns out to be a pretty good quarterback, then this could be a pretty interesting offense to watch. The defense, generally speaking, is usually pretty good. So I would expect the defense to be okay. They've lost a couple guys on defense. But again, they've really changed this offense around, and it's a pretty exciting team to watch offensively, I think, potentially, compared to what we've seen with them in the past. And just looking at it from a schedule standpoint, Bears have a fairly easy schedule. They only play 7 teams projected to win 8 or more games. That will be their last 4 games. That'll get pretty tough from a schedule standpoint. The Lions have a pretty tough schedule here. They're going to play 9 games against teams projected to win 8 or more games. And the Lions are just the Lions. They just, they're just never really going to go anywhere. Now they do have some people in there from the Patriots system, so they might be getting themselves organized a little bit better here in the next couple of years. But until they do something, the Lions are the Lions, and I would not expect anything too promising out of that team. Great quarterback though, Matthew Stafford. They just have been a kind of a cluster, from an organizational standpoint over the years. So the funny thing is, I sit in Vegas and I sit next to a guy who covered the Lions for 25 years, and he tells me to a pinpoint. A couple of years ago, he told me they weren't going to win any more games. They had about 6 games left. I think maybe they won 1. They're just not a good organization. But again, they do have some Patriots brass in there, and potentially we'll see a little bit of a turnaround here in the next couple of years as well. We look at the Packers, a very easy schedule. They only have 6 games against teams projected to win 8 or more games. Of course, they get Aaron Rodgers back this year. I bleed green and gold. I'm a Packer fan. I will tell you, every single year, the Packers will go as far as their defense takes them. The last time they had a really good defense was 2010. They won the Super Bowl. If they can just get a defense that's just average, top 10, top 15, then obviously they've got enough in offense to make a serious run. But every year it seems their defense fails them. They do have a new defensive coordinator this year. They got a new GM who's gone out and used free agency a little bit and brought in some defensive guys. Muhammad Wilkerson from the Jets is there now in the defensive line. But they've got a lot of young people in their secondary. They've lost some people in the secondary, and they've replaced them through the draft over the last couple of years. If those guys play to their potential, what they think they can do, then yeah, this defense could be okay. But if they continue to suffer in the secondary back there, then this is going to be a team that just continues to put up points, but also can't stop anybody either. So we'll see. Again, they'll go as far as their defense takes them, and obviously Aaron Rodgers needs to stay healthy with that team as well. And then the Vikings, a fairly easy schedule here. They're only going to play 7 teams that are projected to finish 500 or above. And the last 4 games are going to be fairly easy contests for them. And they're going to be a tough team this year. But again, I don't think necessarily, it kind of goes against the grain a little bit, but I don't think necessarily they're going to get anything more out of Kirk Cousins than they got out of Case Keenum last year. Case Keenum probably wasn't going to repeat that every single year, where Cousins can be more stable from year to year and decent. But I don't think we're going to see a ton of upside. And also the other thing to note on the Vikings, Nick Easton, their center, is out for the year. And they've also got some other injuries along the offensive line as well. So again, that was a very healthy team last year, especially on defense. If that turns a corner a little bit, then we could see a little bit different year for the Vikings as well. Things went really, really well for them last year, and they came up just short. So again, they'll be a tough team, but they were fortunate last year, and that was maybe their year. But they do have a good head coach. They're going to be there certainly, and then luck will determine how many more wins they get above 10, et cetera. So that's a look at the NFC North. Let's go look at the NFC East now. And we got our Philadelphia Eagles, obviously the Super Bowl champions last year. A great run for them. They actually overachieved by about 1.2 wins last year. They had 13 wins, again, with the Pythagorean Theorem, which is a pretty accurate gauge. They should have won about 11.8. They were 5-2 in close games, so fortunate. Very good head coach, very, very aggressive head coach in Doug Peterson. They did lose their offensive coordinator, Frank Wright. He is now gone. He's over at Indianapolis. But Doug Peterson's a very good coach, very good offensive-minded coach. They should get Carson Wentz back fairly soon. And obviously, as we saw in the Super Bowl, Nick Foles did just fine in the playoffs for them as well. The other team to note here is the Giants. 3-13 last year, a lot of injuries. Checking the injured chart, they were the 8th most injured team last year. They basically lost all the receivers throughout the course of the season last year, including Odell Beckham Jr., of course. but they actually underachieved. They should have won probably about 4.1 games. They were 1-5 in close games. So here's one of those cases where are the Giants going to win more than 3 games this year? Yeah, I definitely think they are. They got a new head coach who'll probably be a much better fit for them. But the question is, their over/under number is set at 7.2. I've got them only winning about 6.25 games. So they have the 6th toughest schedule. And this is another one. I'm not going to tell you right now it's the best bet, but I will likely play the Giants under their season wins of 7.5. Just checking. Let me just check to see what I saw with that earlier. Yeah, they're at about 7 point, it's basically 7.5 and then juiced under. So I think they're actually a pretty decent play to play under the season wins as well. This is a division where you see the teams that finish 3rd and 4th tend to finish 1st and 2nd and vice versa from year to year, which would actually mean the Giants will probably do pretty well this year. But I think Philadelphia will hold their own this year. Dallas is always kind of a 8-8, 9-7 type team. Washington could take a step back here, which would mean the Giants potentially could finish 3rd. I guess they could win 8 games and finish 2nd. But when we start to look at the schedule here, we see the Cowboys, first of all, not a super tough schedule. They're only going to play 7 teams that are projected to win 8 or more games. But when we get to the Giants here, they have a brutal schedule. They're going to play 10 teams that are projected to win 8 or more games, including their first, whatever that is, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I think that's first 7 games out of the gate with a new coach, a new system, are going to come all against very, very tough opponents. Now, they're going to have a pretty easy schedule when you get to the end of the year. For their last 5 games, they're going to be against below 500 projected teams. But I think this is a team that we could potentially look under on the season win total. I just don't know that they can get to 8 wins, and that's what they would have to do for you to lose your bet on the over/under win total for the Giants. Looking here, the Eagles, they actually have a pretty tough schedule as well. 9 games are going to play against teams projected to win 8 or more games, including, you can see, 3 of the last 4 games, Dallas, Rams, and Houston. Houston will be a much improved team this year if Deshaun Watson stays healthy. So they're going to have a fairly tough schedule here as well. And then we can see the Redskins here. The Redskins have a brutal schedule. They've lost some talent. They did pick up Alex Smith, of course, in place of Kirk Cousins. Nothing wrong with that. That will help him. But they lost some other players who are pretty decent on that team. And then one of their top draft picks is now out for the year with an injury as well. And they're also going to get faced with 10 games against teams projected to win 8 or more games as well. I'm just going to go back up to the front page here and just see. I don't think there was much value here in looking at these other teams. The Giants are the one that I would say I think it's a pretty reasonable play and pretty good value play on the under for the season win totals for the Giants as well. All right, moving along to the AFC West. And here we can see one team color-coded here that overachieved, and that would be the, or underachieved, I should say, would be the Los Angeles Chargers, going 9-7 last year. But their Pythagorean Theorem should have projected them to win about 10.4 games. Now, they were only 3-4 in close games. I didn't look back, but if memory serves me right, that's actually an improvement in close games for them. They have typically not been that great of a team in close games, but they actually improved upon that last year, but still managed to underachieve for the season. And when we go down below and look, we see they're projected to win about 9.6 games with the line maker, and they're projected to win about 9.5. So really not a lot of value. There's really not a lot of value in this division as a whole.
Scott,
but yeah.
Scott, just a second. Sorry to butt in, but the AFC West has always traditionally been one of the toughest standings to try and get a standout from those core of 4 teams, isn't it? It's traditionally
Correct.
been very hard. Yeah.
Yes, so one year it's Kansas City, the next year it's Denver. The Chargers always have potential and they never quite live up to it. But this year there's a lot of people that are very optimistic on the Chargers here. The problem with the Chargers, I mean, and they really have built a really good defense, but they're always an injury-saddled team, and they're already injury-saddled again this year. They lost their tight end, Hunter Henry. There's a chance that he might come back, but more than likely he's gone for the year. That's a very, very good player for them. They also lost Jason Verrett, cornerback. He's probably not their best cornerback anymore, but he was probably their second best cornerback. He missed most of the year last year, and now he's going to miss all of the year again this year. And then they lost Jalen Watkins, another cornerback who's probably just an average cornerback. But when you start to lose depth back there, that just starts to hurt the team as a whole. And then Corey Lujet, their defensive tackle, he's suspended for the first 4 games of the year as well. And that's a pretty good defensive tackle for them as well.
Scott,
and you're right, Dan. Yes. Go ahead.
Sorry, just a quick one. You've projected Denver to win 7.3 games. Can you let us know the over/under on that? Denver start the season off with 3 home games, so they could be red hot early doors. So what's the over/under on them in Vegas?
Yeah, so and maybe I should have stated this when we started. Just when you see projected wins there, that's the book's projected win total.
Right.
7.3, and let me just look because I just updated these before we got on. Yeah, they're at about 7.4 when you factor in the juice. But then when I look at them based on the lines that they have projected for the whole season, I get about 7.13 wins for them. So right around their number. But they could be an interesting team this year. I mean, Case Keenum has looked pretty good in preseason so far. He's obviously going to improve that offense. I mean, the quarterbacks they had there last year were just brutally bad. The offensive line was horrible, and that offensive line should be a little bit better this year as well. They did lose some defensive players, but they're still a very good team on defense as well. And this is a team that it would not surprise me if this team challenges for the division as well. And to your point on this, Daniel, if you look at the schedule, they play the first 2 games at home against Seattle and Oakland. Those are winnable games.
2 games at home. Yep.
Yeah, 3 out of the first 4. I mean, they do play 9 games against teams projected to win 8 or more games. But like you said, this division is up for grabs. Kansas City's coming out with basically a rookie quarterback. I mean, it's his second year, but Alex Smith is gone. We don't know what we're going to get from Patrick Mahomes. Oakland is Oakland. That team, I went under on their season win total last year. They were very fortunate the year before, and they're just a team right now. John Gruden's back there, but they're not going to, I don't see them being anything special this year. Again, the jury's out in Kansas City. So this could be a Charger Denver Bronco. I do know some sharp people here in Vegas who are very optimistic and very bullish on Denver this year as well. So, if you really only have to beat one team, call it the Chargers, that gives you even a better chance to possibly get to the top of the division.
Awesome. I'll be having a little play on Denver.
Yeah, I like I said, I mean, you're always going to get a decent defense there, and man, they've got receivers in Emmanuel Sanders and Demaryius Thomas. They just didn't have a quarterback that could throw them the ball the last couple of years. And in Case Keenum, he's not the best quarterback in the world, but if he plays anything like he did last year, he's going to be more than good enough to make that offense dramatically better than what it was last year and really the last couple of years. Even Peyton Manning's last year there, Peyton Manning was not Peyton Manning any longer. So they've got a chance to be a decent team this year, I believe. All right. Any other questions on that one?
No, we've got no questions so far. So move along, mate. Up to you.
All right. Very quiet group. Hey, so let's go to the AFC South. We got a lot of color here, a lot of things happening here. So we'll look at Tennessee first of all. That's a team that went 9-7 last year, but they should have only won about 7.4 games. So they overachieved last year. And again, they were also 7-4 in close games. So that tells me 2 things. Number one, they played 11 close games. So they played a lot of close games. They certainly weren't dominating teams. And then also, obviously, they were better than 500. And again, that stands a chance to kind of regress a little bit this year. So it would not surprise me at all to see Tennessee take a dip this year. And then you've got Jacksonville, who actually had a very good year last year, 10-6. But they actually underachieved by about 1.8 wins. They should have won about 11.8 games. They were actually 4-4 in close games, so it wasn't like they had bad luck in close games. They just statistically they were a pretty good team. They just could not win as many games as their Pythagorean Theorem projected them to win. The most frustrating thing with Jacksonville is in that AFC Championship game against New England, they controlled that whole first half. I believe they were up 14-10. New England had just scored. got the ball back with 55 seconds left and 2 timeouts, and they took a knee and went into the halftime. And that was just as soon as I saw that, I knew they were in trouble. You cannot be conservative, especially against a Bill Belichick team. But the rule I've always used, if you would have gone to their head coach at the end of the game and said, we're going to give you one more drive, 55 seconds and 2 timeouts, would you like to have that one last drive to try to score and win this game? He would have said yes in a minute. And he gave up that drive at the end of the first half, and you just cannot do that. And so there's always questions about, you cannot play this game conservative. And that's why Doug Peterson was able to beat Bill Belichick in the Super Bowl, because he kept his foot on the pedal and kept pressing forward. And so there's always that question with Jacksonville from a head coach standpoint. But there's no question they have talent there, and they've added to the offense. We know the defense is actually pretty good. The other team here, of course, that it's underachieved is Houston. They were 4-12 last year. Basically, they had no quarterback once Deshaun Watson went down, but they underachieved actually by 1.7 wins. Were 1-4 in their close games, so underachieved there as well. The season win total for Houston is 8.8, set by the line maker. I've got them at 8.9, so there's really no value there. But Houston's a very, very interesting team because Deshaun Watson is a very, very dynamic quarterback. If he can stay healthy, they're going to get J.J. Watt and Whitney Mercilus back. Both those guys went down early in the season, a game against Kansas City. And I think when Deshaun Watson was in there for the 5 or 6 games that he played, Houston led the league in scoring. This is a team that I think could be very, very, very good this year. Sometimes teams catch up to second-year quarterbacks, but they only got 5 or 6 games on him. So I think there's a lot more to come that teams haven't seen from that offense yet. And they've got some playmakers at wide receiver. So Deshaun Watson is a very tough animal to stop. And if he stays healthy, this team could be very, very, very good. And from a value standpoint, the only other things I would say here, Tennessee, they've set that line at 8.1. I've got them at about 7.77 wins. I think there's a little bit of value on Tennessee going under. They overachieved last year. They were lucky in close games or fortunate in close games. And there's just some slight value again to the under. The other one here is Indianapolis. They're set at about 7.3 wins by the line maker. I've got them at 6.4 wins. I think that's a lot of value on the under. I do know some really sharp people here in Vegas who bet that. I didn't see the number, but early in the year it must have been 6 because I believe they bet them over 6 wins, and obviously it's jumped way up to 7 and 7+ now. I respect their opinion, so I always look a little more cautiously at that. But I see value in the under here, although, like I said, there are some sharp people who have seen value in the over. But that was at a lower number. I'm certain they would not be betting the over at this number now with Indianapolis. And obviously they get Andrew Luck back, which will help them tremendously, of course, as well for the season as well. But when we look at Houston, Houston only plays 5 games against teams that are projected to win 8 or more games. They have a very, very easy schedule this year. And again, if they can have their quarterback for the whole year and stay healthy, this team has a chance, I think, to do some damage. And if you were gonna, I'm not really into future picks, but if you were gonna put any money down, I think Houston might be about 20-1 to win the Super Bowl. I don't think I think those are pretty decent odds if you're going to get good odds from a future, because I think they have a legitimate chance to do some damage in the AFC this year. The Colts, you can see here, play 7 games against teams projected to win 500 or 8 or more games, so not a real tough schedule. Jacksonville, again, fairly easy schedule for this division, but Tennessee actually does have a tough schedule. They're projected to play 9 games against teams to win 8 or more games. So again, I see a little bit of value in the under for Tennessee. I just think there's a regression coming here for this club. And they won, going back and just looking at their wins from last year, they won 9 games last year, but they also had a cupcake against Indianapolis and Houston, who had no quarterback. So both those teams are going to have quarterbacks this year. It would not surprise me to see Tennessee go under. Again, I'm not making that a best bet yet, but I'll be surprised if I'm not on the under season wins for Tennessee this year as well. And 2 divisions to go here. And looking at the AFC North, we can see a lot of color here. Pittsburgh is a team that really overachieved last year. They went 13-3. Their number says they should have won about 10.5 games. They overachieved by about 2.5 wins. And when you look at that, again, if we go back to that stat, the teams that exceed their wins from the previous year by 2 to 3 wins end up usually declining by about 2.5 wins the next year. That would put the Steelers down to about 10.5 wins. They were also 8-3 in close games. So a lot of close games and a really good record in close games. That's probably not likely to happen for them again this year, even though they are likely the class of this division. I don't see a lot of value in the over-under number because I've got them winning about 10 games. I think their season, when I looked at it before we came online, I think they're at about 10.5 for that's 10.3, I guess. So there's not a lot of value in going under, but I certainly would not go over on their season wins. Baltimore's a team that underachieved last year by about 1.4 wins, and they were only 2-4 in close games, but I don't see a lot of value in theirs either. As we can see here, the line maker has set them at about 8.5, and I've set them at about 8.58, so it's basically on the number. Cincinnati, again, roughly around their number. And then, Daniel, there's your Cleveland Browns with a win projection of 6 wins, and I've actually got them at 6.21 wins. So they are actually projected to exceed their win total. And if you don't follow this Pythagorean theorem, this may not mean much to you, but they underachieved by 3.3 wins last year. That's pretty massive. And they were 0-6 in close games. I guess that means they were 0-10 in games they weren't close because they didn't win a game, of course. But so as I said, we know Cleveland's going to win some games this year, and the real question is just, can they win 6 games? But here's the problem potentially with them going over their season win total. I'm going to fast forward to them. They have 10 games against teams projected to win 8 or more games, so they don't have a real easy schedule here, and that's potentially going to create some issues for them. But again, this is a team that was pretty even from the line of scrimmage last year. They were minus 28 or so in turnovers, mostly because of Deshaun Kaiser, their quarterback, and they're bringing in a quarterback now that is not going to turn the ball over. The real question, though, is, as you and I were talking before we got on, Daniel, if Cleveland starts out 2-6, which could very easily happen, is there a lot of pressure to play Baker Mayfield? Now, maybe Baker Mayfield comes in and saves the day for them, but he's a rookie quarterback, and typically rookie quarterbacks take time to adjust. So if you are betting them over the season win total, you've always got to factor that into the equation as well, that you might end up with a rookie quarterback at some point in the year. And you can just see here, based on the schedule, with that red dotted all over the place, they're not going to get a lot of easy games this year if they do end up with a rookie quarterback in there. So,
well,
go ahead,
Scott. Dorsey wants them in a win now situation, so I don't know if they're going to be given that time to rebuild over 1 or 2 years. So that could be the issue in regards to getting minutes into the rookie quarterbacks. So we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah. So but I do think they've improved the team, as we said at the beginning. There's a lot of decent players there now. So from a week-to-week standpoint, this team actually could provide some value. And you can see here, just looking down in the lower, down in the lower left-hand corner, some of these lines have changed, but I think their week 1 line still around 6.5, 7, somewhere in that neighborhood. Week 2, they're going to New Orleans, getting 9 points. Again, if this team's competitive, they can hang within 9 points. You see week 3 at Oakland getting 6 points against the Raiders. The Raiders are an average team. This is a team, I can tell you right now, if Cleveland plays the way I think Cleveland could play, and time will tell, of course, and they go to Oakland, they're getting 6 points. And it's Tyrod Taylor, because you kind of know what you're getting from a quarterback standpoint. To me, that would be almost a gift, was getting 6 points. So Cleveland could actually provide some decent value on a week-by-week basis. Of course, we'll kind of see it as the season goes, but this is a more talented team with a little bit better direction from John Dorsey than they've had in the past. So it's a team to definitely pay attention to and keep close eyes on.
For sure.
And then just looking at the Steelers here, they have a tough schedule, 9 games against teams projected to win 8 or more games. So this will not be a cakewalk for them. And obviously at the end of the year here, they're playing 1, 2, 3, 6 out of their last 9 games are going to be against fairly tough competition as well. We'll wrap up with the last one here with the AFC East. And you can see a lot of red here, which means most of these teams overachieved last year. New England overachieved by 1.2 wins, but New England, they overachieve all the time on their numbers, so I don't put a lot of stock in that. They just are who they are. Buffalo's a team that overachieved by 2.6 wins, which is a lot. And again, if we just keep in mind teams that exceed by that many wins, typically decline by about 2.5 wins. They may have lost their starting quarterback. They may have to go with the rookie Josh Allen, who's actually looked okay, but nonetheless, putting a rookie quarterback in there is not a great thing early on. And then Miami is a team that overachieved as well. From a value standpoint, I don't see a lot of value here. My number on Buffalo, by the way, projected wins, I think that number may be wrong. They may be closer to 5.5 wins. I don't know if I have the wrong number in there or if that just got adjusted when A.J. McCarron went down, but that's closer to about 5.5 wins for them. But just looking here from a Buffalo schedule standpoint, if they do have to go with the rookie Josh Allen, who again has looked pretty decent, he's going to come out of the gate playing 4 very, very tough games. At Baltimore, at home against the Charger defense that's very good, at Minnesota, at Green Bay, and then 2 weeks later at Houston. And then 2 weeks after that against New England, who they just don't ever compete very well against, especially at home. That's a very tough gate to get out of for Buffalo, and they could get off to a very, very, very slow start with their schedule. Miami actually has a pretty easy schedule, only facing 6 teams projected to win 8 or more games. The Patriots, they always seem to have an easy schedule, but they again this year have a pretty easy schedule. They've lost some pieces, but it's too soon to ever say New England's going to regress here because they've got the best coach and one of, if not the best quarterback. So they're just always going to be there. And again, they play in a division that's not super tough for them, so they can accumulate wins there as well.
Scott, time's got to catch up with him. He's 41 at the start of this season.
You would think so.
He's not Benjamin Button. His output has to decrease at some stage. Like, he's been superhuman for so long. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I agree. I mean, and they're a team that's just always seems to outplay their numbers. You think you have value going against them, and then they blow the team out, and that's just the way they are. But they've lost some guys here now too. I mean, they lost Nate Solder on their offensive line. They lost Malcolm Butler, the cornerback. They lost Dion Lewis, a very good running back. They traded away, I believe, Brandon Cooks. He's gone. Julian Edelman is suspended for the first 4 games. They did pick up Adrian Claiborne, who had a good year last year. Although Adrian Claiborne, that was the game where he had 72 sacks, I think, against Dallas when they were missing their left tackle. He accumulated a lot of his sacks literally in that one game. So they've added a couple pieces as well. But I agree. Look, New England's a very good team, very well coached, very good quarterback. But I've always said this, and I said this, with the write-up I did in the Super Bowl last year. They typically have a very good division or very easy division where they can accumulate wins, get home field advantage. Here's the one thing to note with them, and just note it again for this year. New England has not won a playoff game on the road since 2006. They just don't typically go on the road, and when they do, they don't win. You can think back where they lost at Denver the last couple of years and whatnot. So they typically, and that's why I believe they have very close Super Bowl games as well, because they typically have a fairly easy schedule because their division isn't real competitive. They're able to play these home playoff games, get to the Super Bowl. Now they're on a neutral field, and they're typically playing, obviously, one of, if not the best team from the NFC. And so they're in for a very tough competition when they get to the Super Bowl. Give them full credit for doing everything they do, because there's a lot of other teams that would never be able to take advantage of that situation. But you're right. At some point here, this is going to catch up to them. I just don't know if there's any other team in that division to really compete with them. So they're probably going to win the division again this year. And you can see they only play six teams projected to win 8 or more games. So, they're probably going to win the division, get a bye, and be in a somewhat similar situation again. Unless Brady gets hurt, then that's dramatically changes everything, of course. So,
Scott, I've got a question from one of our great clients, Colin. Do you use these season projections as part of your capping for individual games?
I'm assuming he's meaning season over/under win projections. Is that what he means? I do not, but you can kind of see. I'm a week-to-week guy, and a lot of stuff I do is situational based. But I try to get into some of the analytics. Injuries are a big thing. I will tell you, for handicapping me, the NFL is a grind. It's a real grind because it's not just math oriented, because there just aren't a lot of games. So it's sometimes hard to just rely on math. So for me, I'm looking for key injuries And I'm not talking about quarterback injuries or running back injuries, which everyone knows about. It's more like the linebacker or the offensive line or defensive line, some stuff that's not quite always as visible. So it's a week-to-week thing from that standpoint. I use a lot of situations that kind of point me in the right direction. But then, having gone through this, I don't really use these projections to really handicap throughout the season. But you can tell, we talked about the Bears. I do believe the Bears offense is going to be better. They could provide some value early on. There's a team like that, that you just kind of what we talked about, I will pay special attention to, and we might find some value early in the season with a team like that. Tennessee kind of overvalued a little bit because they overachieved last year. We might find some value in going against them, especially early in the year. So things like that, yes, I will use those a little bit. And then we'll kind of let the season kind of play itself out and kind of go week by week, and obviously let line value and injuries and all that kind of stuff take its course as well. And Cleveland's another team. We'll be looking for value with Cleveland, especially early in the year with Tyrod Taylor, especially if they're getting a lot of points, like I mentioned, that Raider game. To me, that would be a joke of a line if these two teams play like I think they will.
So the Pythagorean analysis can be utilized for week-to-week games. It's not purely over the course of the season.
It could be, yeah, it could be used, like you can apply it to baseball. It's a little bit different formula for baseball, but if anyone just goes out and Googles Pythagorean Theorem for baseball, it will show you the formula. And the beauty of that is you can go out there right now and apply that to all the baseball teams, and you'll see teams that have overachieved and underachieved. And, without using that formula, the other way to kind of look at it is it's really margin. How much are they winning their games by? And if you see a team that's outscored their opponent by 100 games in baseball, that's probably a pretty good team. If you see a team that's 5 or 10 games over 500, but they're literally even in terms of outscoring their opponents, so they're not outscoring them, maybe even negative, that's probably not a real good team, and probably not a team that's going to continue to perform along that same path. And you can do the same thing in the NFL. I don't really use it from that standpoint week to week in the NFL, but you can certainly apply it to that, and it'll give you a very good idea of teams that are overachieving and underachieving as the season's going on, and possibly finding some value later on throughout the season.
Right, just flicking through here, we've got a couple more questions, but that's about all we've got time for, Scott. So, mate, what I wanted to do was say thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you very much, Daniel. I appreciate everyone getting on, and obviously appreciate the opportunity. And hey, let's have a winning season again. And they're a lot more fun when you win. So let's hope we can continue to win in the NFL this year.
Absolutely, guys. Thanks for tuning in. We've had 3 out of 3 winning years. It's the biggest sport in the world. This guy is a proven winner. He's been doing it for a long time. You get best bets each week, in-depth previews for every game. Plus, there's futures bets, and you've obviously seen the full season preview. I'll be in touch, but please, guys, if you've got any questions at all, don't hesitate to call us on our 1300 500 057 number or shoot us an email. Scott, thanks again.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Good luck.
And thanks for tuning in. See you guys.